Hello and welcome to Piwik PRO YouTube video series. The topic of the video is how to use filters in Piwik PRO. So, what you're gonna learn? First of all, knowing how to use filters is fundamental to effective data analysis. A filter refines data by selectively including or excluding information, enabling more precise analysis. First, we're gonna learn different types of filters in the context of where they are used, like dashboard, widget, or segment, or perhaps report embedded filters, because you might use them slightly different in those situations. You will also learn the difference between filtering using dimension and a metric, and filtering by dimensions but of different scope. We will also apply this knowledge in practice and learn the logic and conditions that can be used while working with Piwik PRO filters. So first, let's look briefly where are filters in Piwik PRO. So when you want to explore data, you can use them from the right place. And first on the list is a segment. So segment can be accessed by clicking on all visitors or this plus button. And when clicking on all visitors, you can either click on all visitors, meaning no filter will be applied, or select any type of filter that you already have in order to create a segment, and because you can apply a segment when you already have it, already have view. In order to create one, click on manage segments, or you can alternatively click on this plus button and click on manage segments here, and that will do the same thing. Alternatively, you can go to settings, and under segments you can add a segment in here. You can edit segments from this place as well by clicking on those three dots next to the particular segment. But let's go back to reports. So we would use a segment where we want to apply the filter on and off, and it basically follows me. What do I mean by that? It means that when I'm switching between reports, so if I were to go to this report, I can not only test my segments, that shows me data for smartphone, but I can go to other reports, let's say campaign, and now all my reports that I'm sort of clicking through are showing me data for when the visitor accesses our website or an app. Well, in case of an app, that would be most likely be a smartphone or tablet, but in this case we would be sure that they are using a smartphone, no matter which report I'm clicking on. And it's the same for when I go to dashboards or custom reports. That filter would basically follows me. It is ideal if you're using the same type of filter for many different reports or dashboards, and you need the flexibility of either applying on and off a particular filter, or when you want to apply one and then another one to sort of see the difference. Alternatively, you can even compare to different segments. So I can apply one, and that is specific for smartphone, and let's say another for desktop. Then we turn into this comparison mode. So now my data is being shown for smartphone using this purple color on the table, and whenever we're looking at the data, so on the line chart as well, and this green color when I'm looking at the desktop data. So that's another feature of segment. And again, what is crucial about segment, that we can apply it on and off, so it's basically you can reuse your filter. It doesn't stay with the particular report or dashboard. It basically follows us, and you can do the comparison, which is something that is not possible with other types of filters. Another type of filters, based on where they are used, are filters that come with almost each and every report. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a session log, for example. If I go to the top of the session log, I can click on this drop-down menu, select any sort of dimension that I have available here, and then filter by that dimension. I can go to device and software, and I will also have some filters available here. In this case, I also have a search as a filter, but in here I can use dimension and metrics. So that's a filter that's available and built into report. I can also use quick filter. that I can use together with this filter or one or another. This quick filter gives me a bit more flexibility because I can play with the logic here, and then I can select the value. Moreover, I can add multiple conditions, so I can add more conditions than just one condition into my report. So that's quick filters. Advantage of those filters, the search and quick filters, is that you can use them even if you have only viewer permissions. They are not saved with the report, so we need to apply them every time we want to use them. So they are very explorative in the nature. What do I mean by that? That they are not being saved. So if I were to apply, let's say device type is desktop. So it has been applied, but if I go to engagement report and then go back to device and software, this filter is gone. As much as they are easy to use, they lack in flexibility. We cannot use them sort of any sort of conditions we like, nor any metric or dimension to filter data with them. Again, you would use them for ad hoc, quick analysis. So there are other filters that you could use instead to have the flexibility and all that. I have made a separate video for those particular filters and some other settings that you can use to leverage your ad hoc and on-the-go, on-the-fly analysis. And I will drop the link below this video so you can access it. Another types of filters that are available in Piwik PRO are filters that are embedded into mostly custom reports and dashboard widgets, but some built-in reports also have embedded filters in them. What do I mean by embedded filters? It means that if we take an example of this custom report, this report has some filters applied on already. And this is what we mean by embedded filters. How do I know whether there was some filtering applied onto that report? Well, this yellow dot is an indicator of that kind of filters. So we can see the message above, but we can also check what is the exact logic of those filters by clicking on these three dots and clicking on show filters definitions. And this is where we see those, the logic, dimension and metric. Another way of checking that logic is by entering edit mode. That is available for us only if we have at least editor permissions. So if I click on edit mode, I can scroll down and see the filters that have been applied on. Not only that, I can change the logic. I can apply more filters. But what is the advantage of this type of filter? Well, basically it's very flexible, probably the most flexible filters that you can use, because not only you can use logic on on the level of a single dimension or a single metric, but also you can add more metrics or dimensions of the same type or different type than those two that we use here, and add them either via logic or and depending where we're gonna drag and drop them. Another thing about those embedded filters is that we can use not only dimension but also metric. When we were talking about segments can use only dimensions, where we cannot use metric for segments, and that is the one thing that sets apart embedded filters and make them more flexible when compared to segments. Now, disadvantage perhaps for those embedded filters is that they are being fixed into the report, so we cannot copy them to another report, so we cannot reuse them, but that's the nature of those filters. They are staying with the report because there's some specific purpose for that report. Another thing is that I can use them for, and I already mentioned that, I can use them for a single widget. So if I click on edit widget, I can show the definitions, but I can also edit and check the definitions of the filter. So those are embedded filters. Now let's get into logic of filters and how it works, how we should effectively use the filters logic in Piwik PRO. Since embedded filters are the most flexible and can use dimensions and metrics, we're going to use them to explain all intricacies of filters, filters logic, or in other words, how filters conditions work. First concept that is really useful to be familiar with when using filters is the concept of dimensions scope. I'm explaining that concept and other key concepts in another video, to which I'm going to drop the link in the description below. That said, I will explain it here briefly too. So, what is a dimension scope? Basically, dimension scope tells us how dimensions values are being assigned to the dimension. There are two main scopes, session and event dimension scope. If we take session scope, one value is being assigned to the entire session. If we take event scope, sometimes called hit scope, we have value assigned to the dimension every time the event happens, and that might happen multiple times per session. So let's take an example of a session scope dimension, and a good example would be country. So country is a session scope dimension. So what does it mean that it's a session scope dimension? It means that we're going to have one value per visit, per session, because it makes sense. If the visitor comes from, let's say, Germany to our website, we have one value for the entire session. When they go from one URL to another, they don't go to another country to browse that another URL. It's still one and the same country. So that's why we have one value for the entire session. However, if we take for a change another dimension called page URL, they might be visiting multiple different URLs, or even the same URL multiple times during the session, during the visit, and we would record each and every URL that was visited during a session. So we would have multiple values per session. And that's the main difference between session scope dimension and event scope dimension. Now let's take a closer look into the logic of dimension filters. Here I have this simple report with country and source medium as our nested dimensions, and some metrics, sessions, bounce rate, and goal conversions. So let's say I would like to include only data for particular region of the world, Europe, let's say. So what I need to do, I need to go to the right hand side and find the appropriate dimension. I could use search or find my dimension, depending what is easier for me. If I know the name of the dimension that I'm looking for, I could use search. But in this case, let's say I'm unaware of the dimensions that are available in Piwik PRO. So in my case, I'm going to go with a hunch and I'm going to choose the location. And here I can see all different dimensions. So I could potentially use country dimension, but in this case, I would need to know all the countries that are included in Europe and add them one by one. So I could go step higher or level higher and use continent. In this case, all I need to do is just to choose Europe. And in this case, once I save it, it gives me the all the countries from Europe in my table. So that's fine. But let's say I want to include data for only 2 countries from Europe. Or not, but let's say those countries are going to be France and United Kingdom. So I no longer need this dimension because I can do it on the level of a country. So I'm going to remove it and I'm going to this time use search. So country, I'm going to drag and drop it, and United Kingdom. So I'm going to add United Kingdom, and now I could drag and drop another country dimension, but instead I'm going to click on this icon, which basically means that I'm going to multiply the logic that I already have here, but I'm going to alter it and I'm going to add France. So now I've included United Kingdom and France, and I can see my filter is working. Now, what would happen if I was to add country under and logical operator and not in between or? So let's do that. Now I see no data. Now you might be wondering why that happened. Well, basically it all comes down to the scope, and in this case the session scope when it comes to the country dimension. This basically means that while a person that might be visiting the website using the same device, say smartphone, from different locations because they happen to travel a lot, but on an individual level, visit level, i.e. session level, that person can only visit our website from one country because only one value is being assigned to the session, and it can be either United Kingdom or France, but never both. In a one session, in a one visit, I can be only located in a one location. So that always have to be one or another, but never both. That logic never gonna be true. Now, does that mean I cannot use an logical operator? Of course I can. I can do it, but in this case, I need to use different dimension. And let's say I want to filter now by source medium. So let's find my source medium dimension to use it as a filter. And in here, I'm going to change the logic to contains, and I'm going to add direct. Now, once I save it, I will still see data for United Kingdom and France, but we can see that there's much less sessions that we've had previously. But now when I'm going to click on that, I'm going to get into the level of source medium. So I'm going to see those 15 sessions broken down by source medium, but now I included only direct entry. If I were to remove that filter, and I'm going to click on, not only I see more sessions. If I click on United Kingdom, I can see that direct entry is 15 sessions. So I can play with the logic. Moreover, I could go even a step farther, and let's say I want to include all the cost per view and cost per click. So in this case, I can add source medium again, but this time I'm going to include cost per click and cost per view. And let's save it. If I'm going to click on that, I've included cost per view and cost per click in my report. Now at this stage, you may have seen me using different filters, using this drop-down menu filter, or in case of source medium, I had to type in the values. Now the drop-down menu filter is used for several dimensions only, where the values are known and fixed. In this case, we have different logic. So we have is not, so we can include particular country in for this dimension, exclude is not, because not every time the source, the location is being tracked. We might choose for privacy reasons when the visitor does not consent. We may decide not to track the location data, and in this case that value will be empty, and we can use this as a filter. And then for those who we did track the location, we might use is not empty, and that way we would know how many visitors gave us the permission for it to be tracked or not. But again, that's depend on our setup, but that's a way to filter data. Now, as for the values where we need to type in data, we have far more options here. So I can use is not, contains, does not contain. So let's start with the is. So when we have is, we need to type in the exact value. So if I were to leave it like that, we would see no data. Now, if I were to add banner cost per click, now it shows me data, but this is exactly as it was tracked. If I were to add, let's say, a space here, that would not work because it's not exactly the value that was tracked by our analytics. So we need to be careful. The same goes for if I were to add an extra space here or some extra letters, that wouldn't work. Now, another one is not. So I could exclude banner cost per click. And now I have all different values, but I don't have a banner cost per click. Now, moving farther, contains. So we've used contains, but we haven't used does not contain. So let's say does not contain cost per click. And I can see I've excluded that. But now let's say I want to use starts with. So I do have banner. So now it's banner cost per click. But if I use cost per click instead, for starts with, it wouldn't work because none of the values starts with it. However, if I were to type in, let's say, B, now I have two values because both of those starts with B. Now, this may not be useful for the dimension source medium, but if I were to go, and let me just go for a moment to this report, here I have this, let's say, start with URL that is banking demo. If I want to include all the data for blog posts, I could use up to this point, starts with banking demo piwik.pro.com/blog/ and now it would include all different blog posts on my website. So this starts with might be useful for certain reports, but let's go back to our report here. And now the next one is ends with. Again, similar logic. Let's say cost per click, because it ends with cost per click, it works. But if I were to add again something like A, let's hope there are values that are ending with A. No, there are not. So let's say, let's use C, because we know there is a value that ends with C. We can see banner cost per click because it ends with C, organic. We could also use organic to include just organic from Bing and Google. But let's move to another logical operator, match regular expression. So in this case, if you're familiar with a regular expression, you can apply logic to in a single line. So let's say, remember when I was using cost per click or cost per view. So let's go back to this contains. It gave me the values for CPV and cost per click, right? Now I could potentially use regular expression in one line. So I could switch to match regular expressions. But this case, I would use cost per view. In regular expression, this means that I'm using logic cost per click contains cost per click or contains cost per view. So if I were to save it, it gives me both of those values. Now, I could obviously add more values to the end. So I could add, let's say, banner. And now I have a banner. And I could add, let's say, organic. And that's just one way of adding a regular expression. This is when I'm using this sort of like a bar but in between the values. And now I've added organic, so I've added this thing. So there are more logic that can be applied using regular expression. This is just an example. And I could revert that, does not match regular expression. And now we've excluded all those values that just a moment ago were included. So those are the regular expressions. Now, up until now, we were using mostly session scope filters. A few things that we should mention about event scope filters as well. So here I have this simple report, page URL, and some metrics related to page URL, page views, and unique page views. So what it's basically going to show me, all different page URLs and their performance based on page views and unique page views. But what if I want to include a specific URL in the report? So I want to be very specific, so I'm going to use page URL filter is, and I'm going to paste in the URL loans estimation. If I save that, I now isolated one URL to my report. Obviously, I would probably want to add more than just one URL. So what I need to do, I want to duplicate it and now just change the URL. I know there's a page that goes like that, so loans page, and I can save it. And now I have two URLs on my report. And obviously I could add more, but what would happen if I were to add it like that by using an logical operator? Now in this case, we would not see any data. When we're adding page URL filters like that, we are telling the analytics that the one and the same page view, because we operate in the event scope, is both, or in other words, have two values. So it's both this URL and this URL have two values at the same time, which can never be true. What you might want to do sometimes is to add filter that would filter session in which visitors went to two or more specific URLs. So if I could, as a web analyst, think about a situation when I want to test how many visitors, how many sessions there were when the visitor went to this URL and this URL in a session. And such filtering is not possible yet in Piwik PRO. However, as an alternative, in some cases, you could use funnel report and user flow report, which allow you to sort of play with all different sequencing and see, you would be able to see how many sessions of where a visitor went to this URL and this URL there were, and perhaps whether there were any conversions, things like that. So not that it's not possible using filters. Not just yet. Another thing that you could potentially use, obviously, is to use different logical operators. So you could use them like that. So that's something that should be known from previous types of filtering. And now we have loans and loans, which makes sense. I could use doesn't contain. So let's say I could potentially exclude any loans pages by adding loans. And now from my report, all of these, I think I haven't changed the logic, does not contain loans. And now I've excluded those two pages. So none of those pages contains loans in the URL value. Then we could also add does not contain case insensitive, contains case insensitive, and we could also do regular expression, just as with previous sort of filtering in a session scope. The idea is the same. Now, another thing that you could do, now you could add, let's say, money, and then add and this time add, let's say, blog. And now if I save that, I will include any blog post that has money in it. So I have money and a blog. So it doesn't mean, this is basically what it means when we add logic and. Basically, one and the same URL contains money and blog in it. So we can still use analogical operator for event scope dimensions. Now let's take a look at metric filters, which might be used less frequently, but mastering them could help you in data explorations and perhaps in finding those hidden gems of performance metrics, whatever those might be. So here I have the simple report, source medium dimension, metrics sessions, bounce rate, and goal conversions. So notice that we've got different types of values when it comes to metrics. We've got numbers, so just a plain number, 706, 646. And in some cases, we will have percentages or ratios. So we need to take that into consideration whenever we're using the filters. Now, let's say I want to include only the data for values for our source medium that are higher than 400. So I would include all these values, but I would exclude all these values and anything that is lower than that. So what I need to do, I need to go to edit and then scroll down underneath dimension filters. I have the space for adding metric filters. So in my case, I want to filter by number of sessions, and notice that I have all different logical operators that are specific for numbers. So equals, not equals, is greater than, is less than, is greater than or equals, or is less than or equals. In my case, I won't include values that are greater than 400. Alternatively, I could include 400 as well, and I could use is greater than or equals. So actually, let's do that. Although it doesn't makes much difference in my case, because we didn't see any value that was 400. But let's say we want to do that. So I'm going to save it. Now notice that all the values that were included here are values that are higher for sessions than 400. So I can say that my filter works. Now, let's say I want to include another filter, but this time I want to use bounce rate. Now, notice that I'm going to use N because I want both filters to be applied. And now I want the bounce rate to be lower than or higher than 30. So it's greater than 30. Let's save it. And now we can see that we have values that are greater than 30. Not much greater, but they are greater than 30%. So that's how we can use metric filters. Now, notice one thing. Let's exclude bounce rate and let's leave sessions. Now, right now, when I'm filtering that the values should be higher than 400, I'm doing this for the date range January until June. Now, what happens if I'm gonna change it to, let's say, month of January only? Now, I see no data because in the month of January, there was no channel that would drive that much traffic into our website. So that's why the entire data, like pretty much nothing was filtered in. So I would need to adjust for the metrics such as sessions, that the value would depend on the date range that we're looking at. That number would depend on the basically date range. It might be different with bounce rate, because bounce rate is a percentage. So it's not, it might be, let's call it obsolete, meaning it would work for any different date ranges. So let's say greater than 30. And again, I do have 1 month included, and we can see that we do have values for the bounce rate, because whether we take 1 month or 2 years or 7 years of data, the bounce rate is still ranging between 0 to 100%. So that's why it doesn't matter when we use metrics for any sort of ratios or percentages. Those are not date range dependent in that context. There are certain dimensions of which values are numbers, like session time, which is a session scope dimension, or time on page, which is a event scope dimension. Again, for both of those, we have value, which is a number, and to be more specific, a time in minutes and seconds. We could use them as dimension filters. So if I were to use session time, I could use it as a dimension filter or as a metric as well. But in this case, I would need to transform it into a metric. But before we do that, let's first take a look at the values that we get when we use them in a report. So if I were to use session time in a report, I could get two options. I could get individual times of sessions and how many of those sessions particular time we've had. So 0 second sessions, 1, 2 seconds, 1. Obviously that's just the preview, so we just get the gist of the available values. But alternatively, I could change it to session time, which is grouped. So we have time ranges. In this case, 15 to 30 minutes range, 30 minutes or higher, 2 to 4 minutes range, and we can see the number of sessions from that particular range we've had. So that's when we use it as a dimension. Now, alternatively, we could use it as a metric, but in this case, we need to transform it into metric. So instead of using as a dimension, I need to transform it into metric, and we have available options: minimum session time, maximum session time, average session time, or medium session time. Now, when we use it as a metric, you can see that as a metric, it no longer describes the session, it no longer is a description of a session, but when we transform it into metric, it's a performance indicator. Like for example, average session time. Let's take a look at the values that we're gonna see. So obviously for 15 to 30 minute sessions, average time will be something between 15 to 30 minutes, which in our case is 21 minutes or 43 seconds. 30 minutes or higher, obviously something higher than 30 minutes. So we can see 1 hour, 10 minutes and 4 seconds. So those are the values. Now, what it means if we use them as filters. So session time, if we were to use it, but this time I'm going to remove session time. I just want to show you what sort of values we're going to see when we use the session time. So let's say we want to include sessions that are longer than 10 minutes. So that would be 600 seconds. Well, first, let's see the values without it. So we see LinkedIn referral, we've got 124, banner cost per click, 119. And now if I'm now gonna add session time, and I want to include only the sessions that were greater than the time of session was higher than 600 seconds, which is 10 minutes. Now we notice that we've excluded all the sessions from each of those source medium values that were less than 600 seconds. So we basically excluded some sessions from each of those different channels. And we obviously have different average session time. Now, if we were to use it as a metric filter, we can obviously use different options: minimum, maximum, average, median, and sum. But let's use average. And if I'm gonna include only sessions that are greater than 600, now we're working on averages. So in this case, it's a benchmark. It's a performance benchmark. We're not gonna exclude sessions from each of those values. We just excluded all the channels of which average time was lower than 10 minutes. And that's the main difference between a dimension that provides the value as a number, filter as a dimension, and when we filter as a metric.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to our channel. Check the description below to find some useful links like free Piwik PRO sign-up page, community forum page, and links to related videos. Until next time.